So, hi everybody, I'm Jessica Hayes from Active Classroom, and welcome to Facilitating Student Choice Using Active Classroom with Dr. Jana Kirchner. So Jana, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm so glad that you've joined us tonight in what I know is a busy week for everyone, and I'm excited to be here with you. Let me tell you just a little bit about my background so you know who's talking. I have just recently, in the last couple years, retired as a Kentucky educator, and my background is I have been a high school social studies and English teacher. I was a teaching American history grant coordinator for several years, taught at our local university and taught social studies methods and teaching strategies, and then retired from a school district as instructional supervisor. So I work with the Social Studies School Service now on their active classroom, do some training with them in a variety of different projects, and mostly work with social studies curriculum and social studies professional development in local schools around Kentucky. And I'm excited to be here with you tonight. So as I have picked up this job at this phase of my life working with Active Classroom and Social Studies School Service, I have literally fallen in love with Active Classroom, and I'm excited about showing you some of those resources tonight and ways to use them to facilitate student choice and differentiation, because we know that's a challenge and that's an expectation to meet the needs of our learners. So I want to show you some different ways to do that in Active Classroom. A couple things just to tell you up front. I'm gonna use screenshots instead of doing this live, so you'll see a lot of the visuals. This webinar will be posted on the website, but you're also welcome to email me at the end of it. I'll put my email address up, and I'll be glad to share that with you if this is something useful for you or to share with your faculty. So let's go ahead and get started. As Jessica said, we are going to use the chat feature in just a second. So what I would like to do is kind of give you an overview, and then we'll just get started on ways to use Active Classroom resources. So what we're going to do in our time together is talk about why is student choice important, and how can we use Active Classroom resources to create different paths for student learning. And we all know students are all different, they learn differently. It is a challenge sometimes to manage all that, so we'll look at some ways to use some of the series in Active Classroom to do that. So I want to start off by getting some input from you. If you will use the chat feature to begin to think about student choice, let's frame that in our thinking before we go into Active Classroom. And if you would respond to one or both of these questions in the chat feature. The first one, why is it important to allow students choice in the classroom? And the second one, what can be challenging about allowing student choice? And I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and let you type, and then we'll continue. Okay, well, while you're still thinking, I'm going to go ahead and put up the next slide. Thank you for your response. Students, let me scroll up to that. Students feel like they're in charge, absolutely, and we're more motivated sometimes. Students pick the easy way and not challenge themselves, absolutely, is another challenge in the reality of allowing for student choice. Jessica says students being able to make choices in the classroom increases engagement and participation. It allows them to take ownership of their learning. It's like you all read the quotes before we even got to this slide. So feel free to keep jumping in there with responses, but I picked a couple of quotes that I really liked that talked about why student choice is so important. Welcome to the new folks joining us. That student choice is as we give students real choices in the classroom. We have them decide what to do with the material they study, the assignments they complete, the peers with whom they work. It can boost their engagement, which is something you put in your chat feature, allow them to capitalize on their strengths, and enable them to meet their individual learning needs. I like that quote. And I also like the one on the bottom, and I put the sources for you that Choice-based learning is a process in which learners have a greater sense of control, and that came up in our chat feature as well, over how their interests, backgrounds, and preferences work together to enhance their learning. We know as realistic educators that does not come without challenges, and that it's not something you can probably do every day. So as I say, the next piece of it, of using active classroom resources to differentiate, always keep in mind that you are the expert in your classroom and that you know your students better than anyone else. So take what we're going to talk about today and adapt it to the grade level, the content area, and the students in your classroom, because that's what you do best. So use what you can and hopefully adapt it to make it work for you. So we're going to continue and talk about, my slide will advance, there we go, student choice through the lens of differentiation, because I think we talk about that so much in education, and I want to couch it in the areas that I know you're familiar with. As we talk about differentiation, we also talk about it through the areas of content, process, and product. So content, simply, what are students going to learn? Now, realistically, we all answer to state standards, right? But also process, how students are going to learn that content, and product, how students will demonstrate their learning. So I will challenge you as much as possible, whenever you can, to build student choice into any of the pieces of that. And I'll show you some ways to make that work in active classroom. So we're going to just start with content, what students will learn. How do we allow some differentiation within that, and student choice when we can? So what students will learn. 2 ways to differentiate based on content are based on students' ability, or sometimes now it's called just their readiness to learn. We know kids learn at different paces. So it could be they bring to them an ability, or it could be they just simply have not been exposed to the background to make them ready to learn that particular piece. So we can differentiate content based on their readiness to learn. I'm going to show you how to do that with student self-assessment, and then teachers intentionally planning activities. And that's not necessarily student choice, but I wanted to show you that piece of how the teachers can use active classroom to differentiate based on those very diverse students. Also, we can differentiate content and allow student choice of topics of what they're interested in. And that's probably one of the easiest ones to do sometimes. So let me show you what that looks like. If you just joined us, we're going to use a lot of screenshots and not do this live in Active Classroom. So at the end, if this is new to you and Active Classroom is still pretty new, I'm going to show you the help resources where you can find out more information about this. And if you've just joined us, this webinar will be recorded, but I'll also be glad to share this with you if this is a PowerPoint you could use with your staff. So if you notice at the top, we're going to talk about how we're differentiating by what I put at the top. So this one is we're going to talk about as an example of readiness to learn by having students self-assess. But I also wanted to show you, as kind of a side piece of this, all the amazing resources in Active Classroom. And so you'll see as I show an example that I tried to circle in yellow so you could see what particular lesson series this was. So this first example is from Debating the Documents. And it comes from Should Wilson Have Kept Us Out of the War, that particular U.S. history lesson. So as you will notice, all the pieces and parts that come with an active classroom lesson on the left-hand side, we've said one way to differentiate for content is let students self-assess. So it could be you're halfway through your World War I unit and you've done some background and you want to have the next lesson start with some primary sources or secondary sources. There may be some students who know that they are not quite ready to do that yet because they're a little fuzzy on what happened. It could be simply you let them decide based on your students and their background. If they need a little more background, start here and look at that intro essay or look at that timeline. If they feel pretty confident about the basic events and the storyline of why the U.S. entered the war, then maybe they're ready for these primary sources and the next part down. So that's a simple way, let me go back to that, to have students self-assess And we know active classroom can be used in a one-on-one environment where everybody has a computer and they're doing this digitally, but also know that everything I'm going to tell you can also be used as resources that you print out. If you are not teaching in a one-to-one environment, you can have that essay copied and printed. You can have those primary sources printed out in the folder, and students will still know where they need to start. So that's one way to differentiate for content. This one is really teachers planning differentiated activities. For instance, you are intentionally planning based on the diverse needs of those learners in your classroom. For instance, one is reading level. And this particular series is one of my favorites, and it's decision making. I tried to pick a variety of examples. So this is actually world history and ancient history. Where would you settle in ancient times? And if you notice this lesson, it has a level 1 and a level 2. So it could be that you intentionally assign level 1 to some students and level 2 to others based on the variety, sorry about that, based on the variety that you know in reading levels in your classroom. So let me show you what that looks like. So in decision-making activities, this particular one is where would you settle in ancient times, and you don't know this yet till the end, but one society is Egypt, one is Mesopotamia, and one is a nomadic society. So this is the level 1 of that reading. If you'll notice as I show you these, the picture is the same. The society letters are the same. It's just the reading level is a little bit simpler with more vocabulary built into this level 1. So what they're going to do in this lesson is they're going to read about each of the societies and make a decision as where they would like to settle. So notice the difference in this level 1 and the level 2 reading. So more paragraphs, less vocabulary defined for students who are ready for that level of text. It looks the same as far as the images, but you as a teacher can assign these to different groups of students or different individual students. Their task is all the same. They have to pick which society they would choose to live in and have examples from that text to support their decision. So that's an easy way for teachers to differentiate based on the reading level in the text. Another way to do that is in all the active classroom series that have readings, there are lexile levels. And as you notice this one, and I just did a search on Mexico to see what would pop up from that. And notice the variety of lexile levels down through this column. So it could be that you want to assign different ones to different students based on the lexile levels or their reading levels. So that's teachers intentionally planning differentiated activities. Another way we can differentiate, and this one is actually a great way to differentiate based on student interest, is let students, when you can, have some choice in the topics that they would like to study. Like I said at the beginning, we all are driven by state standards and in content usually and literacy, but within those, whenever you can give students some choices, that's a great way to engage them and motivate them more. So what this might look like. This is a world history lesson on World War I, and everybody's going to study World War I, and everybody's going to be responsible for the big picture and what happened, causes, what happened along the way, events at the end of the war. But where you can, if you could let students choose topics based on what they're interested in. They might be interested in weapons. They might be interested in the home front, the leaders. And notice this particular series, Focus on World History, has a variety of readings on all those different topics. Classroom management tip, sometimes this has worked for me and other teachers I have worked with. Whenever you finish the last unit, you do your assessment before you're going to start this, say the day before I start my World War I unit. You could introduce students briefly to some of the topics that you're going to cover in this unit and let them do a 1, 2, 3, maybe exit slip where they put in order the first 3 topics that they would like to research. And then you as a teacher can kind of sort that out. That is a little classroom management piece of that. So the next day as class starts, you might have a group that's weapons, a group that's propaganda, a group that's home front, and that helps manage the chaos a bit with students picking their own topics. Please feel free to jump in at any time too and comment if you've tried any of these, or if you have questions. I'll be glad to respond to that. And Jessica's going to help me with those comments. So how do we do that in Active Classroom? If you are doing this digitally, you go to Manage Students. And I tried to put the arrows so that you could see them. And if I have a group that I know is interested in battles and weapons, I manage students and then a new student group. And I name that group. So I'm going to name that group World War I Battles and Weapons. Then I'm going to add students. And you will see mine are demo students without real names because I use this account for training. So I'm going to say that student 18, 8, 11, 15, and 5 picked battles and weapons when I did my little vote ahead of time. So I will assign them to that group in Active Classroom. And then I've got to assign them a reading. So we know that Focus on World History series had a variety of readings on topics. So I go to Assign. And then I pick the reading. I can set the due dates and the unlock days. I can customize the assignments here. But I unselect all and I choose a new kind of war and the tools of war. Because remember, this group was the one that wanted to do battles and weapons. And so I've created the group, and I've added the students in an Active Classroom. Then I would assign that text to this group, and it shows up over there. So they will have access to that one particular reading. If I have another group that wanted causes of the war, I would assign that group that particular reading. As always, you can print all these out and just give the paper copies and highlighters. That works just as well. So a variety of ways to use these resources. So another way we differentiate, we talked about content and some ways to differentiate in content, and that is process. And process is how are they going to learn? How are they going to get to that information? So I was thinking about it from the kind of perspective of 3 different ways. First one is kind of simple. Some students like to work individually. Some like to work with a partner. That's not an Active Classroom magic thing. That's just simply you working that out behind the scenes as a teacher whenever you can. If there are students that would like to move forward in their learning with a partner and that's appropriate, then let them have some choice in that situation. The other 2 things on our screen here is that perhaps we have an essential question that we're all looking at for our class. What if they chose the sources they were going to use to get to that? For instance, I'll show you some examples. But we all have an end goal of being able to answer this essential question. And we know social studies right now is really focused on inquiry. And how do we have an inquiry question and get to an answer? So what if we let them have different paths to get there? And that whole way of thinking also applies to choice boards or learning menus. And I'll show you some examples of those. Jessica had a question, is Active Classroom only for social studies? Let's stop and answer that for just a second. It is targeted for grades 5 through 12 in social studies, but depending on how you purchase, there are English teachers also that can use it and use the examples of primary sources. So that would be something that you would need to contact your sales rep and ask about how your contract is worked out at your school or your district. But there are many sources in here that would work great for English, for informational text. So hopefully that answered that question. So let's look at some examples of how to differentiate process in Active Classroom. Okay, so my series, I put this one at the top. So our series on this is C3 Inquiry. And we know C3 College, Career, and Civic Life Framework is guiding social studies in almost all the states right now. So we have a big question, then we're going to look at a variety of secondary and primary sources to help us answer that question. But we're wanting to differentiate by process, or how the students get to the end goal of learning an answer to that question. So what if we assign, and the C3 lesson has 10 primary sources, what if we let them choose? We gave them the question and we said pick 2 of these sources to read and analyze, discuss with a partner, and see what clues you can find out to answer that question. So our end goal is the same. We're all looking for sources to answer the question, but the way they get there, the students would have some choice. That works digitally. That could work in centers, or like a gallery walk around the room, and they had to pick 2 of the sources, or stations around the room. That would work. And they had to stop at 2 stations. So you could do that a variety of ways. This particular series in Active Classroom is called Material World. What if we were a geography or sociology class, and our essential question is, what can we learn about a culture by examining a family's material possessions? So let's think about that for a second. What can we learn about a culture by examining a family's material possessions? Active Classroom has a series called Material World. They're photographs and writings about a variety of different cultures around the world. And if our essential question is big and broad enough, and that is often how standards are written, honestly, students could get to that end game a variety of different ways. So what if we let them have some choice? We tell them, of all the countries I've assigned to you, digitally or paper copies, choose 2 of the countries, examine the images, and then read the interesting facts about that country. But the key is they are all looking for answers to our big essential question, or a big compelling question that we're using, but allowing student choice along the way. How did I do that? If you're new to searching in Active Classroom, if you notice I put the yellow bar. If you're new joining us, we're using screenshots to kind of show how this works. I searched for series. I knew I wanted Material World, and I knew I wanted images. So you can search in your advanced toolbar here, only 4 to show what that looks like. So I searched for Material World, and I searched for activity type images, and that pulled up all those countries that you saw in our previous slide, all the different Material World countries. So it wouldn't matter which one students picked, because they all could get to the end question no matter what country they chose. Another way to differentiate for process is what is called a choice board or a learning menu, or you may have heard it called a tic-tac-toe or a think-tac-toe. It goes kind of by a variety of names. But I'm going to kind of talk to you as if I'm planning my World War II unit now. And this is kind of what I've arranged using resources from Active Classroom. But if you look on the left side, and honestly, it doesn't matter how many boxes you have. And some people will say, make sure they make if you're doing a tic-tac-toe, make sure they make a row. I've never been that controlled on this, because I want them to learn and let them have some choice. So I would just say have them choose one from each row, because as a teacher, you design what those rows are. So if you notice, as I think about teaching World War II, what do I want them to know? I think, well, I want them to know the causes. We have to get all those leaders in power and the aggression and that story. And then maybe major battles and strategies, where it took place, what was going on in each place. And then I want them to know about the leaders and everything that was happening there. And then I want them to know the outcomes or effects of the war. So that could be the Holocaust, that could be the bomb, that could be a variety of different things that came out of World War II. So I did a search on World War II, just as a topic or key idea, and looked at different resources or series in Active Classroom that would fit each of these. So it could be you give students a digital copy of this, or you give students a printed out copy of this, and they can pick and choose what they want to explore and how they want to explore them. You can assign things within these series. This is me just giving you a broad idea. But they have to have one in each of the categories, so they'll get some pieces of the learning along the way. You could have them share with the class what they learned. You could have them partner up with somebody who read a different thing than they did. So a variety of ways to do that choice board or learning menu. But remember, the key is we're differentiating for process. So they all do different things, but they're getting to the same goal of understanding those 4 big ideas about World War II. And last but not least, we differentiate based on product. And I think sometimes this might be the easiest one to do. And product is simply, how are students going to demonstrate that they learned? Hopefully all of our products or our assessments are tied to our essential questions or guiding question, whatever you call them, compelling question, whatever your school or district calls those. But I would just encourage you to, when you can, allow a choice of products as much as possible for students. How they display their learning can be done in a variety of ways. So there are lots of ways besides what I'm going to show you, but here's some things built into Active Classroom. This is our C3 inquiry series again. It's from the American Revolution. Why did the colonists win? And this is that series. Remember, C3 has all those primary sources. So I just want to show you at the bottom, it gives you some options for how students are going to show their knowledge. If you click on communicating results, you'll get a variety of options, and you can let the students pick. You can put students in groups and let them respond based on that. You have a variety of ways to implement these, but notice the variety of these communicating results topics. We have a fictional diary, we have a role play activity, we have a short essay. In this particular series, Historian's Apprentice, this is what happened at Ellis Island. Similar structure in that there are a variety of primary and secondary sources built into Historian's Apprentice lessons. But notice as you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that they provide a debate option and a document-based question. So if students choose to work in a group and do a debate, and that's how they're going to show they learned this lesson, that could be one option. Or they could respond to a document-based question. And in most of these lessons, there are more than one question topic provided. So maybe if they choose a DBQ, they could even choose from which question. This particular one has 4 that they want to answer. Again, same goal, but different ways to show our knowledge. This is a everyday life lesson, and it's Revolutionary War, the background period. And if you notice, it has as some options at the end that they could rewrite a part of history. Again, you could type in the box if you're doing it digitally, or you could do paper version as well, or they create a recruiting poster for their particular, or to recruit for the Continental Army. There's also a piece in that they explain why they want to remain a loyalist, remain loyal to England in that lesson as well. So a variety of choices. Another one of my favorite series is History's Mysteries, and I pulled a world history example for this one, but they all start with a question. So this particular question is, how did the bubonic plague change life in Europe in the 1300s? And just to give you a structure to those lessons, if you're not familiar with them, you start out as a criminalist, and you have a variety of clues, a mystery file. A lot of people would do this around the room like a gallery walk and make it like a crime scene. And students will work in teams to try to look at clues and figure out what the crime was, who committed it. As you are looking at your clues, you're filling out a forensic report. So you're looking at the objects, the artifacts, all kinds of pictures, detectives' notes. That's lots of research where they pull in the content there. But they see a variety of sources, and they try to figure out what the crime was. So in each of these History's Mysteries lessons, there are a variety of assessment options at the end. Remember, if we differentiate for product, we're going to let them choose how they show their knowledge. So this would be an easy one to let them pick. They might choose to do a forensic report, or a text message news alert summary, or a front page news story, or a breaking news report, or a graphic organizer where they put their whole criminalist theory together. So that's an easy one to let them choose how they want to show their knowledge. So know that those are all built into each of those History's Mysteries lessons, along with the PowerPoint and the teacher's guide for ways to do that. But that's an easy one to differentiate for product. So how do we find all this? If you are new to Active Classroom, as you log in, you will see at the top there is a question mark, and that is a place you can go that will pull up a variety of how-to video tutorials, how to add students, how to create assignments, how to build groups, how to manage assignments. Some of the stuff I talked to you about in this is in that variety of examples. And there is a Contact Us button that has a drop-down screen that you can also ask questions along the way. So hopefully what I've shown you tonight is how to use a variety of Active Classroom resources. And we talked about a lot of different series to allow student choice as much as possible in content, process, and product. So anybody have any questions? Please use the